The signature on that document wasn't mine, and the moment I realized it, I understood that everything I thought I knew about my son had been a lie. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the Thursday before Thanksgiving, because that's when it actually started. That's when my daughter-in-law said something at my kitchen table that I haven't been able to forget since. She said, "Dorothy, you really should think about what happens to all of this when you're gone." She said it with a smile. She was looking around my kitchen, the countertops. Edward and I picked out together, the window above the sink where I grew herbs for 31 years, the photographs on the refrigerator. She was looking at my home the way a person looks at something they've already decided belongs to them. I told her I had thought about it. I told her everything was taken care of. She kept smiling. "Of course," she said. "Of course it is." My son said nothing. He was sitting right there, at the same table where I'd helped him with his homework, where I'd sung him happy birthday, more times than I could count. He looked at his coffee cup and said nothing at all. I should have known then. Looking back, I should have known. My name is Dorothy. I'm 67 years old, and for 34 of those years, I was married to the most decent man I've ever known. Edward passed 2 years ago this January. Pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to the end. We didn't have much time, but we used every minute of it. We said everything we needed to say. I held his hand when he took his last breath. Right there in the bedroom, down the hall, and I have never in my life felt more heartbroken or more grateful at the same time. Edward and I built everything together. The house, a 4-bedroom colonial in western Pennsylvania that we bought when our son was 3 years old. The savings, the investment accounts, a small rental property on the other side of town that Edward managed himself for years. None of it happened by accident. We worked for it, scrimped for it, made choices for it. Edward skipped vacations so we could pay down the mortgage early. I worked overtime for 6 years at the school district so we could fund our retirement accounts. We did it all ourselves. When Edward died, he left everything to me. That was always the plan. Then, when I was gone, the estate would go to our son. That was also the plan. My attorney had drawn it all up years ago. Everything was in order. My son is 42. He works in commercial real estate, or at least he used to. About 18 months ago, things started going sideways. A deal fell through, then another one. And then I started noticing small things. He stopped mentioning work when we talked on the phone. His wife started calling me more often than he did, asking careful, probing questions about the house and what I paid in property taxes and whether I'd ever considered downsizing. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself they were just concerned about me living alone. I am not a naive woman. I raised that boy by myself for 2 years while Edward traveled for work. I managed a staff of 23 people for over a decade. I have served on the board of our local community foundation and negotiated more budget disputes than I care to remember. I am not the kind of woman who misses things, but when it's your own child, something in you wants to keep believing. The Thursday before Thanksgiving, after my daughter-in-law said what she said and my son said nothing, I walked them to the door and hugged them both and told them I'd see them Sunday for dinner. And then I stood in my hallway for a long time in the quiet. I called my attorney the next morning, not because I knew something was wrong, just because something felt wrong. His name is Gerald, and he's been my family's attorney for over 20 years. I told him about the conversation. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always appreciated about Gerald. When I finished, he said, "Dorothy, has anyone asked you to sign anything recently?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "Not yet. If they do," he said, "you call me before you pick up a pen. For anything." I told him I would. Thanksgiving came and went without incident. My son carved the turkey like everything was fine. My daughter-in-law brought a sweet potato casserole and complimented my tablecloth. My 2 grandchildren ran through the house and knocked over a lamp and apologized in that half-genuine way that children do. And I laughed and said it didn't matter. It was a normal Thanksgiving. I almost convinced myself I had imagined the whole thing. 3 weeks later, my son called and asked if he could come over. Just him, not his wife, not the kids. He said he needed to talk to me about something important. He arrived on a Wednesday evening, and he was holding a manila envelope. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same chair he always sat in as a boy, and he put the envelope down, and he folded his hands on top of it, and he said, Mom, I need you to really hear me out before you react. I told him to go ahead. What came out over the next 40 minutes was this. He and his wife were in serious financial trouble. The business had collapsed entirely. They owed money to 3 different creditors. They were 4 months behind on their own mortgage. His wife's parents were willing to loan them a significant amount of money, but it wasn't enough, and the bank wouldn't refinance without additional collateral. He slid the envelope across the table. Inside was a document 31 pages that would have given him co-ownership of my house, joint access to my primary bank accounts, and power of attorney over my financial decisions in the event of incapacitation or extended illness. He said, "It's just a formality, Mom. It's just so we have options." I looked at the document for a long time. I looked at my son's face, my boy, who I had loved his entire life, who I had sacrificed for and worried about and prayed for more nights than I could count. I said, "Where did this document come from?" He said his wife's cousin was an attorney and had drawn it up as a favor. I said, "Has Gerald seen this?" He hesitated. Just a half second. But I saw it. "We wanted to talk to you first," he said. I closed the envelope. I set it on the table between us. I said, "I love you, and I'm not signing this. Not today, not after Gerald reviews it, not ever. This is not something I'm going to do." His face changed. It happened slowly, the way weather changes first, a kind of blankness, then something harder underneath it. He said, "Mom, we're drowning." I said, "I know. And I'm heartbroken about that. Tell me what I can do to help, within reason, within what I'm able to give freely. But I will not sign over control of my home and my finances." "That's not help. That's something else." He said I was being selfish. He said it just like that, flat and cold, like he'd been storing the word up for a while, like he'd practiced it. I told him I thought it was time for him to go home. He picked up the envelope. He stood up, and then, at the door, he turned around and he said, "You know, when Dad left you this house, he expected you to take care of this family. That's what he would have wanted." I didn't respond to that. I couldn't. Not without saying something I couldn't take back. I closed the door, and I stood in my hallway again, in the quiet, and I let myself feel how much that had hurt. And then I picked up the phone and called Gerald. He told me to bring the document in first thing in the morning. What Gerald found, when he reviewed it carefully, was worse than I had expected. The power of attorney language was written so broadly that it could have been invoked not just in cases of illness, but based on the subjective judgment of, and I want to be precise here, a designated family representative. The designated family representative named in the document was my daughter-in-law. Gerald set the document down on his desk and looked at me over his glasses. "Dorothy," he said, "this is not a favor from a cousin. Someone paid for this." I asked him what he recommended. He said the first thing we needed to do was update my existing estate documents, tighten the language, add specific protections. The second thing, he said, was that I might want to consider what else could be at risk. I drove home and I walked through my house slowly, room by room. I looked at things with different eyes. I had installed a home security system 2 years earlier, after Edward died. It had cameras at the front door, the back door, the garage, and one covering the main hallway. I had never paid much attention to it after the initial setup. That afternoon, I sat down, and I learned that system inside and out. I also made a copy of every important document in the house, deeds, account statements, insurance policies, and I brought them to Gerald's office for safekeeping. Every single one. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. My son called 5 days later. He said he and his wife wanted to come over for dinner, a peace offering, he said. He wanted to work things out. I said that would be fine. They arrived on a Friday evening. My daughter-in-law brought wine, which I found interesting in retrospect. She was warm and pleasant in the way that people are when they want something. She hugged me at the door and said she'd missed me. We sat at the table. I had made pot roast. I have been making that pot roast for 30 years and it has never once failed me. About 40 minutes in, my son put down his fork and said, "Mom, I want to apologize for the other night. I was out of line. I said I appreciated that. Then he said, I've been thinking and I want to be clear. This comes from a place of love, but I've been thinking it might be time to talk about a different arrangement, something more formal, so that if anything ever happened to you, we would be able to step in quickly. He slid a new envelope across the table. I didn't pick it up. My daughter-in-law said, Dorothy, we just want to protect you. I said, from what? She said, from having to deal with all of this alone. I said, I've been handling things alone for 2 years. I'm doing fine, she said, and I will remember this for the rest of my life, she said. You're 67 years old and you're living in a 4-bedroom house by yourself. That's not realistic. Something shifted in me, something quiet and final. I said, I think we should end the evening here. My son's voice changed. He said, Mom, this is not a negotiation. We are trying to help you. My daughter-in-law stood up from the table and pointed at me and said that I was being cruel and selfish and that his father would be ashamed of me. She said I was choosing money over my own family. She said it louder and louder, and then she picked up her wine glass and she threw it. It hit the wall about a foot to my left. It shattered. Wine went across the wall, the floor, the edge of the tablecloth that I have had since my wedding. There was a moment of complete silence. I stood up slowly. I said very quietly, You need to leave my house. Right now. My son looked at his wife. Then he looked at me. He did not apologize. He took her arm, and they walked to the door. And he said, over his shoulder, that they weren't done with this conversation. When the door closed, I stood in my kitchen alone, and I looked at the wine on my wall and the glass on my floor, and I breathed. Then I called Gerald. It was 8:40 in the evening. He answered on the 3rd ring. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Did the cameras get it? I said I didn't know yet. I pulled up the camera app on my phone right there in the kitchen. They got all of it. Every word. The envelope on the table. Her standing up. The glass leaving her hand. Gerald said, Don't clean anything up yet. Take photographs first. Then call the non-emergency police line and file a report. I did exactly that. The officer who came was a young woman, maybe 30 years old. She was kind and thorough. She looked at the wall, at the glass, at the photographs I'd taken. She watched the camera footage on my phone. She wrote everything down. She said, Do you want to press charges, ma'am? I thought about my son, who had sat at that table and done nothing. I said, I want a report on file. I want it documented. She said, That's the smart move. After she left, I called my daughter. I should tell you I haven't mentioned my daughter yet. She lives in Colorado and we talk every Sunday, and she is nothing like this situation. When I told her what had happened, she was silent for a long moment, and then she said, Mom, what do you need me to do? I told her I needed her to know. That was all. The next 2 weeks were quiet. My son did not call. My daughter-in-law did not call. I didn't reach out either. I spent that time with Gerald, doing things I should have done sooner, restructuring my estate plan, adding specific exclusions, updating beneficiaries. We made sure every document was exactly where it needed to be and said exactly what it needed to say. Then something happened that I had not expected. I was reviewing the camera footage from the week before I had been doing this periodically, just out of caution, when I noticed something. My son had come to the house on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at my book club. He'd used his key. He was inside for 37 minutes. I watched the footage. He went into the kitchen first, then into my home office. He opened my filing cabinet, the one where I used to keep financial records. He looked through it for several minutes. He took photographs of something with his phone. Then he left. He did not know I had already moved every important document to Gerald's office. But I did not know yet what he'd been photographing until Gerald called me 2 days later and said that someone had attempted to open a home equity line of credit on my property and that the application had included a document purporting to be a financial power of attorney signed by me. The signature was not mine. Gerald had already contacted the bank and flagged it. The application had not been processed. But there was now a paper trail. And that paper trail had my son's fingerprints all over it. Gerald said, Dorothy, this is no longer a family dispute. This is fraud. We contacted the police. Not the non-emergency line this time, the detective division. I brought the camera footage, the police report from the night of the wine glass, and all the documentation Gerald had compiled. I sat across from a detective who had tired eyes and a yellow legal pad, and I told him the entire story from the beginning, without leaving anything out. He listened. He wrote. When I finished, he said, "You've been thorough," I said. My husband was a careful man. He taught me well. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within 3 weeks, my son was contacted by detectives. Within 6 weeks, he and his wife were facing charges: fraud, criminal attempt to obtain property by deception, and one additional charge related to the forged signature that I will let the legal process resolve in its own time. My son called me the night he was contacted by the police. It was the first time I'd heard his voice in over a month. He did not apologize. He said I had gone too far. He said I had destroyed the family. I said, "I didn't destroy anything. I protected myself from people who were trying to take what I'd spent a lifetime building." He hung up. I sat in my kitchen for a while after that. Edward's photograph is on the wall in there, one that my daughter had framed for me, taken on our 25th anniversary. He was laughing at something, his head tilted back the way he always laughed. I looked at that photograph for a long time. I thought about what my son had said at the door that night, that Edward would have wanted me to take care of the family. I have thought about it many times since. Edward would have wanted me to take care of myself. He would have wanted me to be safe in my own home. He would have wanted me to fight back quietly, carefully. Whoa, with documentation and legal counsel and security cameras, because that is exactly the kind of man he was. He never raised his voice in an argument in his life. He never had to. He just made sure he was right and that he could prove it. I am still in my house. The wall has been repainted. I found a new tablecloth not to replace the old one, but because I wanted something that didn't remind me of broken glass. The old one is washed and folded in the linen closet. Maybe someday I'll use it again, maybe not. My daughter flew out last month and stayed for 10 days. We cooked together and took walks and watched old movies, and she fixed the sticky hinge on the back door that I'd been meaning to get to for 2 years. On her last night, we sat on the porch with tea, and she said, "Mom, I'm glad you called Gerald right away. I'm glad you didn't just sign it." I told her I'm glad too. There's something I want to say to anyone listening to this who might be in a similar place, who might have family members that are circling, asking questions, suggesting arrangements that feel like they're not quite for your benefit. I want you to hear me when I say this. Your home is yours. Your savings are yours. The life you built over decades belongs to you. The fact that someone shares your last name does not give them a claim on any of it. Love is not a transaction, and if someone is making it feel like one, pay attention to that. Get your documents in order. Know what you own and where it is. Have an attorney you trust, and use that attorney. And if someone in your life starts making you feel like taking care of yourself is selfish, please remember that the person saying that is the one trying to take something from you. I raised my glass that night, the good crystal, the set we got as a wedding gift, and I toasted Edward's photograph. I told him we were okay. I told him the house was safe. I think he already knew.